And Rose here. Often my videos will bring up a question or a point or something, and then I'll explain my position and the basis for it. This one's kind of tough. I'm not sure there will actually be a resolution by the end of this video. Now, this came up, it's come up before, but this time it came up when I was talking about how, I made a post on Facebook talking about how there are a lot of statists I would much rather hang around with in real life than a lot of the anarchists that I know online. Because it is very common and perfectly normal for otherwise decent, nice, generous, kind, considerate people to believe in statism, because almost everybody does. And there's a whole bunch of people who are kind and generous and nice who still believe that crap, who I would much rather be around because of how they treat other people. Whereas there's a bunch of mentally unstable jerks in the movement. Obviously, not all of them, but it has at least its fair share. The movement has at least its fair share of just asshole jerks who don't know how to coexist with other human beings without being constant buttheads. But that brought up something that a number of people commented on it, and I've talked about it before, which is, how do you define what it is to be a good person? Because I was saying there's a bunch of otherwise good people who believe in statism, but otherwise they're nice and they're kind and they're considerate and all that. And can you call them good? So I wanted to do a video about the idea of at what point does being mistaken and falling for propaganda BS constitute a legitimate excuse for personally advocating or even committing evil? And it kind of doesn't, but that leaves us in a position where there's a lot of people who, left to their own devices, would be fine people and get along with everybody else and be really nice and generous and all that, but they've been tricked into either believing in or cheering for or actually committing authoritarian violence in the name of law and so on and so forth. So how do you morally judge these people when it wasn't their idea? Like, there's a bunch of people who just on their own are obnoxious jerks. And I was pointing out there's a number of people in the movement who are like that. They're just obnoxious jerks. I don't want to be around them. Even though they don't believe in government, they're just assholes. I don't want to hang around assholes. I'm grateful for the fact that they don't want a ruling class enslaving me, and I will happily use my freedom that they advocate to disassociate from them personally because they're jerks and assholes. But what about the people who in their daily lives aren't assholes? They're totally nice, but they still believe in statism and they still advocate stuff. And you can go all the way, while we're discussing the topic, you can go all the way to the people who literally enforce it violently, like the cops and the law enforcement. Well, I don't make the laws, I'm just enforcing them mindlessly. I'm just using brute violence against you because my political masters told me to. But you can't blame me. You can't judge me for that. I'm just an unthinking robot of the worst people in the world. So you can't say I'm bad. Well, yeah, you can. And, you know, to point to the cliche thing, were the Nazis okay if they said, oh, well, we were just following orders, which, by the way, that's what they said at the Nuremberg trials. Well, okay, yeah, we did some horrible stuff, but you can't really blame us because it's somebody else's idea. I still see a bunch of Americans, cops and just cop worshippers, saying, well, who you should be mad at is the politicians who are making these laws, not the people literally initiating immoral violence against their fellow man because they were told to. Really? So now there's no culpability for the people who actually carry out the evil. And to them, I often say, have you heard of the Nuremberg trials? Doesn't sound like it. And cops constantly say that, well, I don't make the law, I'm just doing my job, I'm just enforcing it. Yeah, I know, and that's evil. But there is a distinction to be made. Now, it's not a distinction as clear-cut as good people and bad people. There's two kinds of ways to be bad. I mean, obviously, I'm overgeneralizing a bit. You can either be an individual jerk on your own. And by the way, there's a big range of people who can be jerks who don't actually initiate violence against other people. Like, I still might want to have nothing to do with them because they're obnoxious and annoying. But okay, if they don't initiate violence against other people, that's pretty good. Like, and the fact that, yeah, good job not advocating violence. Also, I don't want to have anything to do with you because you're annoying. But at least good job on the not advocating violence. But if you compare the average anarchist jerk who doesn't advocate authoritarian violence to the most, like, kind, generous, sweet old, Christian lady who's always trying to help everybody out and then goes and votes for an authoritarian ruling class to rob and control everybody she knows, how much culpability is there? It isn't none. Because if it was none, you would literally say, well, all the people who voted for and became, members of the KGB or the Nazi SS or enforcers of the Soviet Union or Red China, well, they were just doing as they're told. They're perfectly good. There's no moral judgment on you just for committing widespread violence against your fellow man. Yeah, there is. But there is a difference between would they have done that on their own, which is like individual malice, or did they just do that because they were trained to believe in authority and then they did as they were told? I'm going to mention the Stanley Milgram experiments because I can't not, who demonstrated just how powerful in Americans the belief in authority is, so that an authority figure that doesn't even have the power to command or punish anybody, but just says the experiment must continue, most people will do as they're told because they were trained to do as they're told all throughout their education, Prussian indoctrination system. Look it up. And they're surrounded by the idea that the law-abiding people who play by the rules are the good people. No, they're not, if the rules are bad. But when people are that brainwashed, most otherwise decent, notice I keep throwing in the otherwise decent people will act as agents of evil. That's the short version of what Stanley Milgram's experiments demonstrated. So how much can they be blamed for, I was just doing as I was told, and keeping in mind that they were indoctrinated into being that and believing it, and they were surrounded by that? And there's a million different examples you can look at, because now, from the comfort of today, we can look back on, the time of chattel slavery and say, anybody who owned people and treated them like livestock, that's freaking horrible. Absolutely it is. Now, how sure are you that if you lived back there and you were surrounded by people saying that that's legitimate and that's the way of the world and that's how it is and their property, so the owner has the right to do what he wants with his property, how sure are you that your mind, don't hide behind the comfort of today when you're surrounded by a bunch of people saying that's insane. Yeah, they know that now. How sure are you that back then you would have been among those, if you happen to be like white and there's black slaves, among those to say, I think this is horrible and should end. I know it's legal. I know it seems to be societally accepted to a certain degree, and it's heinously evil. How sure are you would have done that? Because it's really easy from today to look to some other form of indoctrination and brainwashing and cultural norms that were just insane and evil and say, well, I would have known better back then. Would you have? Are you sure about that? Because a whole lot of people today advocate different evils that are now socially accepted. They can point to other times and places and go, how dare people, like, how could anyone have gone along with what the Third Reich was doing? How could anybody have gone along with slavery? Meanwhile, they go along with whatever authoritarian injustice today is societally acceptable in the minds of the people around them, which makes them massive freaking hypocrites. Yeah, good for you. You can recognize evil when literally everybody around you goes, that's evil. The question is, can you recognize evil when everybody around you says, well, this is just the way it is? That's legitimate. We need that. It's necessary. It's legitimate. People have to pay their fair share of taxes. And, there have to be punishments. We have to, take their house or put them in a cage if they don't pay tribute to the ruling class. Well, okay, I guess that's necessary. What evils would you, on your own, be able to recognize if you didn't have the benefit of everybody around you saying, well, that's evil? If everyone around you was saying, no, this is necessary and good and legitimate, and then you went along with that, how much are you to blame? And that's the question that to me is pretty hard to answer. I mean, I was a statist for many years. I advocated, I didn't think or talk in these terms, but I advocated that lots of people I didn't know be forcibly robbed to fund a giant military and police that I thought were like protecting Americans. Yes, I was a brainwashed, stupid statist. But that's the point. How much can we just say, well, we were brainwashed, we didn't know any better? And here's the test for me. Did anybody know better? Did anybody figure out and stand up and say, I don't think this is okay? Because if it was nobody, you might be able to say, well, nobody else did either. Like, we all went along with it. But if one person, or 10 or 100 or 1,000 or whatever, for example, in slavery days, the abolitionists stand up and say, this is horrible and evil. I know it's legal. I know the government enforces it. I know it's been around not only here, but the whole world for centuries and centuries, and yet it's still stinking evil. And the fact that lots of people around me seem to think it's okay and go along with it, the fact that even a bunch of the victims of it have sort of resigned themselves to like, well, this is the nature of the world, and like, my job is now to be a good, hardworking slave for the master. Because the brainwashing can do that even to the victims. But if anybody was capable of standing up and saying, this is wrong anyway, standing up against the majority, standing up against literally everybody they know sometimes, and say, this is still wrong, this is horrible. Like, if you examine this objectively from actual principles, this is insane. The fact that it's how we've always done things and it's legal and it's approved by society and government and all, doesn't determine whether it's bad or not. But it's a challenge figuring out how much we can put blame on an individual for what they advocate. And the thing is, I know the vast majority of voluntarists I'm talking to, just like me, used to be statists. Were you a bad person? Was I a bad person? Kind of. No, and also yes. I believed in and advocated immoral violence against my fellow man. I didn't think of it in those terms. I didn't recognize it as that. But how much can we plead ignorance when we're personally advocating it? Or, in a more extreme case, when it's somebody actually out there inflicting the violence to make it happen, like soldiers and cops and stuff. I just followed orders and gunned down some random people I knew nothing about. Okay? You can't pretend to be a good person. But where do you draw the line? And the thing is, I'm not sure you can really draw a line because, you can obviously draw the line of principle, which is you advocated something immoral. Like, that's not a gray area. But when I talk about, like, otherwise decent people, it's like you would have been a nice person if you hadn't been systematically over time brainwashed into believing some bullshit that made you cheer for something evil. The thing is, with enough brainwashing, almost all of us will do that. Almost all of us have done that. I did that when I was a statist. Again, didn't view it that way, didn't think of it that way. But I totally blame myself for not figuring out sooner that I was a cheerleader for evil unwittingly. Didn't know it. And so I know there are anarchists who are quick to sort of condemn as the enemy anybody who advocates government. And I think the moral condemnation may totally be justified. But to view them as the enemy, like they're automatically the enemy and they must be destroyed, is kind of bogus if you recognize that most of us, if we meant well and were taught some BS, most of us went along with the BS and we advocated it and we voted for it. And some of us actually committed it. At one point I actually took the entry exam or whatever it's called to join the National Guard. and got really high things, and they said, you can be whatever you want. You can be a helicopter pilot and stuff. And that was a bazillion years ago. And something inside me just said, no. I was still a statist at the time. I believe the military protects us from evil, blah, 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 yada, yada, BS that I had been brainwashed into. But the thing is, to me, wherever you want to draw the line of sort of moral judgment, and if you want to say, look, he's advocating immoral violence, that's immoral. I agree. Yeah. Is he a bad person? Well, in that way, yeah. He's literally advocating or even personally doing himself immoral violence. You can't pretend that's not bad. That's bad. But I think there's a huge difference, even if they're both bad, like the serial killer psycho who's out there just murdering and eating people on his own, like of his own accord, it was his idea. And then there's the guy who signed up for the military to protect us from our enemies and blah, 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 blowing up some village full of people he knows nothing about because he's a brainwashed idiot, because that's what military training is, making you into a brainwashed idiot. I mean, that couldn't possibly be clearer, that the way they do military training is to crush out of you any shred of moral judgment or individuality and make you into a robot for the worst people in the world. And it works. And it works on people who went in with the best of intentions. Does that make it okay when they're committing evil? No, it doesn't. But it does make them different from the people who would do it on their own, who would delight in it, or the people who join up because I can't wait to randomly kill people. Okay, you're messed up. So to me, you can totally, fling all the moral judgment you want, and I will too, at people for advocating violent aggression against their fellow man, which is most of the people in the world do that by way of their belief in authority and politics and voting and all that crap. But there's still a big important distinction between the people who were tricked into going along with or advocating evil, which is still bad, and the people who are eager to do it. And the thing is, the people who are tricked, you can basically say, well, fundamentally underneath the BS, they mean well, they're trying to be good people, and if they can see through the indoctrination and let go of it, that's basically releasing the real them. Now, this is what Candles in the Dark is all about. I should put a link to that below, where I teach people a way to teach voluntarists a way to talk to the rest of the world, statists, anybody who believes in government, in a way that brings out the inner voluntarist inside the other person, so that they come to recognize that there's a conflict between who they really are and the belief in authority that they were taught to accept. Because there's always a conflict. You can't believe in authority without having massive internal contradictions. It's utterly impossible. Explain why in my book, The Most Dangerous Superstition. But if somebody isn't doing it on their own, and imagine something like, MK Ultra, where somebody is tortured and drugged and basically made into a killing machine. At what point do you say, all right, now you're not culpable at all? Like if you signed up with the best of intentions and they did this to you to the point that you can't even think, you're just a trained dog. And actually, that's a really good analogy, because it's pretty easy to use training to make a dog really violent against somebody else. Is that because does that make the dog evil? No, he's doing what he was trained to do. Now, a person, theoretically, is supposed to have a little more like agency and capacity for moral judgment than a dog, because there's no such thing as morality for dogs. But there's still so much power in the brainwashing and the indoctrination and the people being trained like dogs. And the military in particular, they're literally trained they literally wear dog tags because they're trained and treated as attack dogs. You're not supposed to think, we say do this, you go hurt somebody. That's how it works. That's what you're trained to do. You're not trained to go, I wonder what the background and the belief system of this guy walking down the road is. Like, no, he told you to shoot anybody walking down the road. Okay, pow. I deserve some medals. No, you frickin' don't. You gave up your humanity. But when people undergo that intense an indoctrination, to the point where the real them, the them that used to be there, is just covered in layers of just psychological manipulation and terrorism to make them into that. And that's the worst case scenario. But the way more common version is people grow up in a society where it's like, yeah, government's necessary, so it's going to rob us all. You get to vote for who you want robbed and where you want the stolen loot to go. Oh, goody, that means we're in charge. No, it doesn't, and you're now advocating immoral violence against all your neighbors. But they didn't come to you and say, hey, want to advocate some immoral violence against your neighbor? They did the brainwashing. They did the indoctrination. And so that, again, comes down to the thing of, if anybody is able to see through that and go, I'm not going to do this. This is wrong. Like in the Milgram experiments, every once in a while, somebody's going to say, this is just wrong. I'm not doing it. If anybody can do that, then what's everybody else's excuse who didn't? Did you really not have the capacity to go, this is messed up? And it's important to note in the Milgram experiments, a lot of the time, the people who thought they were shocking a complete stranger, they would like be nervous and shake, and sometimes they'd cry, sometimes they'd beg to be allowed to stop. But all they have to do is don't go like that. You're not even being threatened with punishment. It's just an authority figure saying, yeah, the experiment must continue. So you can see their moral conscience going, this is so freaking wrong. But their indoctrination and brainwashing overrides that and said, nope, you have to do as you're told. Because your whole life, you've been taught that obedience is a virtue. Maybe not openly and in those words, but you see that everywhere. You learn that from almost all parents. You absolutely learn it from teachers. You learn it from cops. You learn it from politicians. You learn it from the media. You learn it from Hollywood. You learn it everywhere that good people are law-abiding taxpayers. No, they aren't. But if you're surrounded by these ideas your whole life, how much culpability is there? And to me, it's hard to say. Now, it's all the way immoral. And the victims of immoral violence still have the right to defend themselves, even if the ones attacking them can truthfully say, well, I didn't know any better. I was just trained I'm just following orders. Well, too bad, because if your orders were to go attack that innocent person and you're mindlessly doing that and the innocent person goes, well, now I have to blow your head off. Sucks to be you. You deserve to have your head blown off because you weren't willing to question the orders you were given and you were doing something evil. The fact that you didn't come up with it on your own doesn't make you a good person. You're still the one doing it. But it makes it a very, it's weird because it makes it a difficult challenge to say, well, are they a good person? Like somebody could be so sweet and generous and kind, but they believe some crap that makes them advocate horrible things. And this has been true of humanity for a really, really, really long time. But so that's still tough for me to call. Like, is that a good person? Not in what they practically advocate, but inside that is a good person. Like they're so nice and generous and considerate and stuff, except their indoctrination. The reason, the more important thing to me of like whether you're sticking good or bad label on them is to realize that the people who are genuinely nice in their daily lives, but advocate authoritarian violence by way of government, they're not doomed. It's not hopeless. They didn't choose the evil on their own. Now, ultimately, they either chose to go along with it and vote or enforce stuff or whatever. So they did still choose it, but they were basically cajoled and bullied and indoctrinated and manipulated into thinking that's the way, that's the right thing. That was true of me too, when I was a statist. So there's the issue of it's kind of hard to know exactly how much moral judgment to throw at somebody who's like a sweet person most of the time, but believes in that stupid stuff. But the good news is the people who had to be manipulated and brainwashed and lied to and cajoled and, indoctrinated, all that stuff, those people are anarchists waiting to happen. Now, as long as they're advocates of the system, to get all matrixy here, they are in a very real sense the enemy of freedom. because they are advocates and enablers of evil. They don't see it that way. They weren't trying to be that, just like I wasn't trying to be that when I was a statist. But because it took lies and deception and manipulation and indoctrination and propaganda and brainwashing and all that to make that person into that, it means that they can go back to being the decent person that they really are deep down inside if they can escape the lies. And again, that's what Candles in the Dark is all about, is helping the real inner voluntarist escape the authoritarian BS they were told, so that not only will they stop advocating immoral violence in the name of authority and law and all that crap, they will be free too. Because, and this is where it gets super sad, the malicious, evil psychos at the top are never the ones on the battlefields. They're never the ones enforcing anything. So the enforcers of authoritarianism, they are agents of evil. They are the ones carrying out immoral injustice. They are victimizers. And a thing that's hard to remember sometimes, and the more fascist they are, the harder it is to remember, they're also victims of authoritarianism. Like the fact that so many cops turn into unstable, violent, sadistic bastards, that's not good for them. Certainly not good for their victims. It's not good for them either. Same thing with people who go into the military and they're totally screwed up, and some come back sadistic, some come back just kind of messed up and incapable of dealing with the world. They're victims of it too. They are perpetrators and victims at the same time. And the thing is, what gives me hope is that the vast majority of people who personally advocate immoral aggression against their fellow man only do that because of all the indoctrination and lies and the, being surrounded by a culture and a society that pretends that's okay and necessary and good. So rather than arguing about, well, whether are they good or are they bad, I would say, do they have the potential to be good, awesome, peaceful people? And for the vast majority of people, the answer is yes. Now, are they peaceful right now if they're voting for authoritarianism? No. They were tricked into doing something that goes against their nature, but they're not hopeless. They're not doomed. They're not beyond salvation. Not to get all religious, but I mean, philosophically, they can still be helped out of that. However much you do or don't want to blame them for mindlessly going along with evil crap. And so that is the focus in Candles in the Dark, of look past all the crap they've been taught, and even all the crap they commit or advocate that is immoral authoritarianism, to find the person underneath that wouldn't have done that if they weren't lied to, and help them out from under the lie so they stop fucking doing it. And that is what fixes the world. Has nothing to do with government, has nothing to do with overthrowing it, having a revolution. It's just about freeing the human mind of enough people that who they really are can escape the indoctrination and garbage they were taught, so that the evil psychopaths who are playing that game lose all their power. So there's lots and lots and lots of potentially very nice, very good people who believe bullshit. And I like to think I was, at least inside, a good person back when I was a statist and believing stupid bullshit and advocating immoral bullshit. So deep down inside, in the vast majority of people, they are perfectly capable of peaceful coexistence, except that they were taught authoritarian bullshit. But helping them out of that, you can release who they really are, the good person who they really are inside. And to me, that is the focus. Because I'm not going to defeat everybody who advocates evil, because it's almost the whole world right now, because they all believe in government. But I absolutely believe that humanity will outgrow the insane superstition of authority. And, I'm doing everything I can to speed that up. And I know lots of you are too. To bring out of human beings the grown-up, responsible, caring, considerate, kind, good people who are right now being held down and tricked into evil by the authoritarian indoctrination. So that's what I focus on. It's why I'm actually optimistic, because I don't think the vast majority of people are genuinely on their own evil, even though they've been tricked into enabling evil and don't even recognize it as that. When they see the truth, the vast majority of people are going to stop enabling and empowering the worst people in the world.